Hello and welcome to Sue Finley Designs. As always, thank you for your support. It is very much appreciated. Now today's video is on how I created this piece on the wall. This is 4.2 litres of resin, so rather than me holding it as normal, I've stuck it on the wall just so that it's safe and secure and doesn't get damaged. But anyway, the video is about how I created this. Now this time it was quite a challenge for me to create this piece. There's a lot more to it than some of the other pieces I've done, and a lot more thought had to go into it. In the first part of the video you'll see how I made the moulds for each individual piece. Now there's 4 different size shapes, and each shape there's 4 colours, so there's 12 per shape, so there's 48 pieces in this, plus the base that everything's sitting on. So I'll go through the whole process on that. Now while creating this video, it very nearly became a major disaster, in that when I was pouring the resin I didn't realise that I had much more hardener in there than the part A or B, I'm not sure which way around it is, but there was more hardener than the epoxy. And so when it came to curing, although it did cure, some of the pieces were still quite soft, and it wasn't until I noticed that the bottles, there was a lot less in the epoxy than the hardener. So, and then when I thought about it, I thought, oh, you idiot, the jug that I was measuring it in, over time that the resin had built up on the bottom, so even though I'd emptied it each time, tipped it upside down, over time I had ended up with a flat layer inside. So it meant that when I poured the first one, let's say I poured 400 mils of the hardener, I thought I was then pouring another 400 on top, whereas in actual fact I had less hardener in there. So not to be deterred, I decided that I was going to plod on with it and just see what happened, because it was a multi-layered piece, and each individual piece was then coated with another layer of resin, and we've got, and luckily enough, the softest of the pieces was the silver glitter. So what I did was, so as you're going around, you've got harder pieces in between that hopefully will strengthen it. And I've found that with some of the other resin pieces, that when you add extra resin to it and you put them together, you get quite a solid and hard piece. So I thought, well, I'll persevere with it. Seeing as I'd used 4.2 litres of resin, I didn't really have much choice. One of the other things I found, that when I poured the glitter, and because I had a black layer, as you can see, a copper metallic, and then I used a copper glitter, that when the glitter sank to the bottom of the layer, so the glitter layer looked very similar to the metallic layer, and I thought there's too much of that colour there's not enough contrast. But I noticed that when I turned it over, I then had a nice glittery layer, and I decided to use the backside, which was going to be the edge that was going to sit on the base. Now this was quite creased because of the mould that I made, so adding another layer to that, I then got a glossier finish. And to be honest, the layers and the pieces themselves are not perfect, and I'm okay with that. I don't have an issue with it being super glossy. Now if you want a super glossy, then you could actually pour another layer on there just to get a nice smooth finish, but for me, I actually like it to have a little bit of texture and a little bit of interest in there, so that was okay for me. So this is the end piece, and in the end I was really delighted with how it turned out. It's actually turned out much better than I thought it was going to, and I would have still gone ahead with the video anyway, because, you know, why not share things that go wrong as well as things that go right. So without further ado, and without me waffling on too much, let's get on with the video tutorial. Thank you. Okay, I started out with creating the design on the computer. I've created 4 different size shapes, each of which there'll be 12 pieces to, and there's also 4 colours, so there's going to be 3 colours, 3 of each colour per shape. So there's 48 shapes in total. So I started off by just printing the 4, on a piece of A4 paper, and I'm now just trimming out the shapes ready to create the template. Now the moulds themselves are made out of 5mm thick foam board. Now foam board is a layer of foam in the centre with a layer of paper on either side, so it's easy to draw on, easy to mark, and it's also very, very easy to cut. So what I'm doing here now is I'm cutting out the very first shape ready to use as a template. So once I've used the paper one once, I don't need to use it again because I've got myself a template to use. So what I'm going to do now is just best I can get use up the foam board as best I can to have less waste. So I'm going to cut 12 of each size. Now the foam board came in large sheets, but what I've done was I cut them down to A3 size, just so that it's easier to manage when the resin's poured on there. Otherwise, with the amount of resin in there, it could end up being quite weighty, so I just made it into manageable sizes. Now each shape doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to line it with a bin liner or plastic bag, so you're going to get variations in the shape anyway. So this is just a quick rough layout, and then I'm just trimming away, and like I say, I'm not worrying too much about it being perfect at this stage. Now I'm not going to bore you with showing me cutting out all 48 pieces, but you get the idea. So now I'm just using another of the sizes to just maximise the amount that I get on a sheet, and that's why you saw where I was numbering them, so that I had a record of how many I've done of each shape. But then once you cut the shapes out, you can actually count them, and you can do it that way, so you don't necessarily have to number them. But what I did do was I numbered the shapes themselves, so that when I come to piecing it together, I could use the shapes as a like a template to make sure that I'm putting the right pieces together. Apologies if the sun shining through the window is putting too much of a glare on you. I hadn't realised at the time that the sun was doing that because I was so engrossed in cutting out the shapes. But at that time of day, there's not much I can do about the sun shining through the window, so I hope it doesn't affect the video too much for you. So once we've cut out all the shapes, I'm now going to glue the foam board to a piece of card. Now this is quite thick card that I had in stock. I think I got it from Officeworks or something like that, and I've trimmed it to the size of the foam board, and I've glued that on with the spray glue that you saw there. Any spray glue will do, and then I've sprayed over the top again to apply another thin layer of adhesive, so that I can now stick the plastic bag. Now you probably saw in one of my previous videos where I put the plastic bag on and I didn't stick it down, and it was when I was trying to fill it with the resin, I noticed that it was moving about a little bit more than I wanted. So this is why I've decided to glue this one down, especially as there's so many parts per foam board. I just feel that it's worth making the effort to stick this down. And with the spray adhesive, it's easy to lift the bag back up and reposition. Now the bottom is still quite creased, that you can't get it perfectly straight. Now I think, and I need to try this out, I could use a painter's tape instead if I wanted a nice smooth finish on the bottom, but as you're not going to see the bottom, I wasn't too worried about that. So I'm just trimming off any excess, and I'm just going to go around and do this for all of the moulds. Now for the base, I've created I printed off a template the same as I did before. Now unfortunately I forgot to turn on the video camera, so apologies for that, but I'm sure you get the idea from what I've done previously. So I'm just cutting out the shape that I'm going to use for the base. I'm just going to trim off the excess here, so make it a little bit easier to work with. And then using another piece of foam board, I'm going to sit this foam board on top, and because this is going to have quite a bit of resin, I didn't want to just use the card, so the foam board gives like double thickness. So before gluing the pieces together, I'm just laying them out, and I'm using the bits that I've cut to create the template of where I'm going to position the centre. And also I've just marked the circle just so that I know where to put it back when I glue it back on. And using spray adhesive, I've coated the backing and the top so that I can then stick the bag on. I'm just using a bin liner, which works the same as plastic bags, so just going around making sure that this is as flat as it can be. I mean, you can see there's still a few creases, but because this is the base and you're not going to see it, I'm not too worried about it. But at least with it stuck down, you can see where your edges and things are when you come to pour your resin. Okay, so now we have all our moulds ready to go, and it's now time to get on with pouring the resin. So we start off with the base. This is just clear, and I just fill it until it reaches the top. I did put a little bit too much and it did run over a little bit, but not enough that it was a disaster or anything. I just trimmed that off once it had cured. Now the base actually used a bit more resin than I thought it was going to, because I'm used to pouring resin onto a similar size piece. So this is roughly 500 ml in diameter. So, but forgetting that it was 5 ml thick, it ended up using a bit more than I thought. So it was probably about 1.5 litres of resin just used in the base alone. So hence why I ended up using 4.2 for the whole lot. So now we're just going to give it a zap with the heat gun just to make sure there's no air bubbles or anything like that. So just give that a quick pop, and we're ready to move on to the next bit. Moving on to the other panels, I've now mixed up some metallic copper. I'm using Colour Obsession metallic copper in with the resin, and I'm now pouring it in two sections. So there's going to be 3 of the metallic copper in 4 of the different sizes. So there's going to be 12 pieces of the metallic copper, 12 pieces of the copper resin, glitter, sorry, 12 pieces of the silver glitter, and 12 pieces of the black resin. Now what I did with the black also is I added a hint of the metallic copper to it so that it wasn't pure black, so when the light hits it you can see the hint of the metallic shining through the black, so it gives it like a sort of shimmer effect when you move it in the light. So I just go around just filling up the areas, and I'll zap these also with a heat gun as I go just to pop any bubbles. So just working one colour at a time. I'm now moved on to the black. Because I was going to add a little bit of the metallic copper to it, I just added the black straight into that cup, because there's no need to use a fresh cup, so that's what I did there. And again, I'm just pouring 3 pieces per size, per shape. So again, there's going to be 12 pieces of this, and I'll continue on with all of them, and once they're all poured, I give them all another zap with the heat gun just to pop any bubbles. And again, don't worry if the colours creep out of the mould a little bit, because we can trim that back once it's cured. Now all the colours are poured. It took a little while to pour everything. This is all the layers laid out curing, and I'm now going to leave these overnight and come back to them tomorrow for trimming and assembly. Okay, so this has been left overnight, and I'm now demoulding them from the bags. Now because the plastic bags and the resin is quite soft and flexible, it is quite easy to remove them from the mould. See how that's quite bendy? So that makes life a little bit easier when removing. And also, if you do have any difficulties removing any pieces, you can actually pull the plastic bags up. Because of the spray adhesive we used, it's not permanently stuck, so you can pull an end up using the plastic bags. And as you can see there, they're actually stuck together, so I've just pulled them apart. So now it's time to trim them. I've just turned them over, so I've got the backside showing. The backside's actually quite creased, but because of the thickness of the resin, it makes it easy to use the edge as a guide to trim the excess off. So we're now going to go through and sort out all of the 48 pieces. Now this piece was quite jaggy, so the bag that was in the mould was not straight, so I'm just trimming the outer edge off just to give a nice clean line. And I had to do that with a couple of pieces, but not too many. It wasn't too bad, so that gives us a nice straight edge, a nice finish. So again, I'll just go around and tidy all of the pieces up. So there's quite a bit of cutting and what have you involved, what with having to do 48 pieces, but I won't bore you with showing you me cutting them all. We'll cut to the next section. Now the centerpiece was cut as well and trimmed back and put back into the mould, because I needed the outer edge for balancing the overhang of the pieces, and you'll see shortly when I start laying it out why that is, because they're still quite soft. This means that, see how that's quite bendy? It just means that it's got some support while it's curing. So I'm just coating both sides of the piece as well as the actual ring, so that we've got like a nice bond between the resin and the panels. So I just added a little bit more plastic there just so that it didn't stick to the foam board. And now again, I'm just coating both sides, and I'm going to go around the whole piece with the first layer, because there's going to be another layer on top of this. So I'm not paying too much attention to the layout of it, in that I'm trying to choose random colours within the 4. Now what I did was the glitter ones that were actually better on the back side rather than the top, because the glitter had sank while it was curing. So I've turned those over and I'm using those as the front edge. So what I'm going to do there is I'm just going to add a touch more resin to those pieces so that it can smooth out some of the creases. But me being me, I actually quite like texture, so I don't mind the creases being there. It just adds a little bit more dimension. But once the resin is cured, we do have quite a nice smooth finish. So a little tip, when laying out a circle like this, what I would do is I will move my body round to line up, to just make sure that the when you're looking down the line of it, it's actually pointing to the centre. Now I did actually place a dot in the middle of the circle in the centre. You probably can't see it too well there, but I'm using that as a guide to where the sunbursts, for want of a better word, are flowing out nicely from the centre, if that makes sense. So and what I do is I'll just move around and just check that things are in alignment. So for instance, like at the piece at 12 o'clock will be directly opposite the piece at 6 o'clock, and same with like 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. So then you know that the pieces in between are going to be lined up fairly good. And you know what, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect either, because it's, you know, it is what it is. It's just the design, you could actually have it going slightly off centre if you wanted. It's entirely up to yourselves. So just continue with that right round, just placing random down. Now you could set up your own pattern. You could do you know, range of colours that go around and they sort of follow the same pattern. I just tried to keep it as random as possible, but having contrast also between each layer and next to each other. It doesn't matter so much when we do the second layer that two colours are sitting together, because we do have more of the orange than we do of other colours, one in glitter form and one in the metallic form. So it's just a case of just doing it to suit your own taste. So now that we've done the first layer, we do the same with the second layer. This time I'm going to place them between the two pieces so that you can still see the first layer below. And I'm trying to pick contrasting colours that make it pop and stand out. And I'm also positioning them slightly different to each other, so we've got some interest happening on the outer and inner edges, with not only the layers being different on the top, they're also, you can see that there's like stepped all the way around, so it's not completely uniform, but there is some kind of balance there. And the beauty with the resin taking quite a while to cure, if you're not quite happy with the layout, you can actually pull some pieces up and move them around until you're happy with your design. So I'll just go around eyeballing it as a go, and just moving and tweaking where I see it is necessary. And once you're happy with the final layout, we then leave that to cure overnight. And so this was left to cure probably for about 14 hours before I came back in the morning to take it out of the mould. So this is the bit I like. I actually like when it's been done and I'm demoulding, because I can see how it's come together. You do need to be careful. It's still quite bendy, because this will keep curing for the next 7 to 14 days. So you see how it's moving, it's got a bit of movement there. But yeah, so once you've taken it out, it's now time to tidy it up. So using my heat gun, a knife and some scissors, I'm now going to take off any excess resin that was on the plastic bags that had been left behind. Not worried too much about the backside being really super tidy or anything. I just want to make sure that there's no stray bits hanging off for when we see the front, because as it happens, because we've got some pieces that actually creep across to the others, it gives it a bit more strength anyway. But yeah, so we're just tidying that up so it's nice and neat from the front, using the heat gun and your knife. So we do that both in the centre and on the outside edges. So once we've finished tidying up all the edges, we can now move on to putting the hanging device on. Now I'm using a heavy duty D-ring which has 2 holes, so putting 2 screws in, which gives it a good bond to the resin. Now you can, if you want, pour a very small amount of resin on the backside there before applying the D-ring. That will give it extra strength once the resin is cured. I find that this is fine as it is, but if I felt that it needed, if it was like a really particularly heavy piece, I would definitely add resin to the D-ring for extra strength. Well, this brings us to the end of another tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it and it's given you ideas for creating something similar, or giving you ideas on how to use foam board for your own moulds using plastic bin liners. So until next time, happy crafting, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.